Clinton is in London, and she was asked a question as to whether the nuclear weapons that are in Pakistan are safe. And she said they were, but I think that is one of the issues, is how to make sure that the worst weapons don't get into the hands of the terrorists. Third big issue is how to deal with a growing gap between the rich and the poor. It is true in this country, and it's true abroad, and while there are fewer poor people in absolute numbers, that gap is growing, and it doesn't take a lot of imagination to see that people that are totally alienated from their systems might in fact be recruitable. There's not a direct line between poverty and terrorism, but if somebody is truly dissatisfied and is willing for money to join the other side, I think that exists. We see some of that, I think, in Afghanistan with the Taliban. Then there's a whole host of issues that I've put together, which is energy and environment, food security, pandemic disease that has to be dealt with. And the fifth issue I had was how to restore the good name of democracy. I'm chairman of the board of an organization called the National Democratic Institute, and I believe in democracy. I think it's the best form of government, and we are all the same, and people want to make decisions about their own lives. But you can't impose democracy. That is an oxymoron. And so democracy has gotten a very bad name as a result of what was being attempted in Iraq. Iraq is slowly getting its act together, but I don't know a lot of leaders that look at Iraq and say, I want my country to look just like that. So these were the 5 umbrella issues that I had. I didn't have the global financial crisis at the time I wrote it, and so you add all that to these issues, it creates a different way of need to operate in terms of operating with partnerships and multilateral action. And then you've got 2 hot wars, Iraq and Afghanistan. You have talks that don't seem to be going very far in North Korea and the Middle East, and trying to figure out what to do with Iran. You have problems in Africa, where more people are actually being killed on a daily basis than anywhere else. And in Latin America, you have issues where, because democracy has not delivered, I always say people want to vote and eat, then what you have is demagogic populism a la Hugo Chavez. So there are a lot of challenges out there, and you need all the tools you have. I teach a course at Georgetown on the National Security Toolbox, and you have diplomacy and economic tools and force and law enforcement and intelligence. That's it. In no manual does it say pins. But I thought a little pins with attitude wouldn't hurt. So on the basis of that, let me now answer whatever questions.
How are you involved at all with the Obama administration at this point?
How am I involved with the Obama administration at this point? Well, first of all, most of the people that are in the administration are really good friends of mine that I had worked with in a number of different ways. And until recently, I was more kind of just an informal advisor. Something's happened that's very interesting, and I was delighted when I was called to do this. In April of this year was the 60th anniversary of NATO. And the heads of state got together in Strasbourg-Kiel and decided that they needed a new strategic concept for NATO, because the last one we had was in 1999, and an awful lot has changed since then. So they decided to form a group of experts to look at the new strategic concept. And every country in NATO named somebody, and the U.S. named me, and then the Secretary General of NATO asked me to chair this particular group. And I'm delighted. In fact, I'm going to Europe this weekend to have the first kind of big seminar that we're having on this, because NATO was created to fight the Soviet Union, and that's gone, and there have been questions all along about what its role is. So that's my kind of semi-official role. But I have never, first of all, I've never been a former Secretary of State in a Democratic administration, nor have I ever had the honor of having the Secretary of State as one of my best friends. So I'm kind of timid.
In the yellow, sir?
What do you think the United States should do when Iran gets the nuclear bomb? And if you were to meet Ahmadinejad, what pin would you wear?
I am hoping very much that as a result of the actions in the last couple of weeks that it is clear to Iran that the international community, not just the U.S., thinks that them having a nuclear bomb is unacceptable. What was interesting a couple of weeks ago at the UN, President Obama really was able to move the process forward by having a Security Council meeting where he got unanimous approval for kind of setting up a structure to have sanctions against Iran if they do move forward, and also to get the inspectors back in. And the Secretary General of the International Atomic Energy Agency went to Iran and theoretically has a date to get inspectors in there. So that has been moved forward. In my toolbox, and when I was a decision maker, you never take any option off the table. And so one shouldn't take the military option off the table. The problem is that we don't know what would happen if we actually used military, which is, from what we can tell, and the intelligence is very sparse, and also, fascinatingly enough, there's disagreement in terms of what the British are saying about how far they've gotten, and the Israelis are saying, what we're saying, all in somewhat different places. But what all seem to agree on is that the Iranians have their various components of their nuclear program in different places, and some in secret places, and some in places among population centers. So it's not the way when the Israelis hit the Iraqi reactor and were able to denature them, that it would be that simple. And so also there is the concern that since the Iranians fund Hezbollah and Hamas and other terrorist organizations, that if we hit them, they would use whatever way they have to make life complicated for us. But all those options have to stay on the table.
So you think the Chinese and the Russians would not want the Iranians to have a
Well,
nuclear
it's
weapon?
unclear. The Chinese, that's why it was such a big deal that President Obama got them to agree on the sanctions, because the Chinese have an economic relationship with Iran in terms of oil. The Chinese are energy hungry, and they need that. And the Russians, you would think that they would not want a nuclear-armed Iran because they're closer on their borders. And they are now saying that they might be helpful in taking some of the enriched uranium and storing it for them and providing them with something else. So we don't quite know. It's part of the problem in not having a relationship with Iran. We haven't had diplomatic relations with them since 1979, so we don't really know enough about what is going on. What would I wear? I have a pin that is in the book, actually, that it was designed by the wife of former Secretary of Defense Bill Cohen, by Janet Steinberg Cohen, which is a dove and an eagle, because it really is the kind of two tracks of holding out a hand to say, if you allow inspectors in and go down this particular route, we can have a different relationship, and then the eagle shows the course. I would also, other than that, wear a green suit in honor of those people that voted and demonstrated because green was their color.
And the orange?
Where do you see NATO and Europe's role in the long war?
Well, this is what we're working on, exactly. Where do I see NATO in all of this? NATO is very interesting because NATO had a very definite mandate, which was to protect, to have this collective security approach if the Soviet Union attacked any one of them. And Article 5 is an article which says an attack on one is an attack on all. Then with the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, there was a real question about what NATO would really do. And in the 90s, I obviously had a lot to do with this policy, is that there was the idea that NATO would operate out of area, meaning that it would help in countries that were not their members, which is why it was strange. I actually was the first person with the military to take NATO to war. We used NATO to stop the ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, and that was one of those out-of-area operations. They are now doing an out-of-area operation in Afghanistan, and so some of the discussion